Hi, everyone. My name is Phil Matee. I'm the Director of Marketing for the Feliciano School of Business. We are here today with Dr. Deniz Appelbaum. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Accounting and Finance. Welcome, Dr. Appelbaum.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you very much for inviting me here today to talk about a very important topic about auditors and COVID-19.
Great. Looking forward to our talk. So before we begin, just to give everyone a reference point, today is April 29th. And the latest update on the coronavirus here in the United States, we have about a little bit over 1 million cases, approximately 60,000 deaths in the entire world. Globally, there's over 3 million cases. So we are definitely in the midst of this pandemic. And this talk we're about to have is very relevant with really everything that's happening. We are seeing how the pandemic is affecting the economy, the stock market, jobs, and all these services. But there's one area in particular, and that's what interested me when Dr. Appelbaum proposed this discussion, is with auditing and accounting and how the pandemic, the coronavirus, has affected her area of expertise. And she co-authored a great paper that we're going to talk about today. It's auditing and accounting in the age of the COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermath. It's an area that for the average person, we don't really think much about because it doesn't affect us on a daily basis, but it does. And Dr. Appelbaum will talk about how it's affecting her field and how it may affect all of us listening to this that are the average consumers. So I'll begin, and also just to remind you, this is on the Business Edge podcast channel. So when you've just downloaded, we encourage you to listen to our other episodes where we featured other Feliciano faculty who talked about the economy and the stock market, the cruise ship industry, as well as consumer behavior. So we have several topics. So I encourage you to take a look at other episodes that we had conversations with other Feliciano faculty about their areas of expertise. So with that said, let's first talk about the coronavirus pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, what were some of the typical audit collection procedures?
Well, prior to the pandemic, there's numerous audit procedures that auditors undertake to collect evidence. Some of them are virtual already, depending on the nature of how technical or online the company is and the type of industry it is. Much of the evidence may be collected already online. However, there are some cases where, for example, a manufacturer or a retailer still requires quite extensive physical presence by the auditor to collect this evidence. So there may be paper documents that need to be collected. The big one is observing and verifying inventory counting, which is required by the standards. So the auditor actually has to stand there and observe the employees undertaking their inventory warehouse count. So I always tease my auditing students that, as entry-level associates, they're going to be there on New Year's Eve observing inventory counts at a calendar year-end client, where they're closing on December 31st. So that's always been an unsavory part of the auditing work, is the observation of inventories, and then also verifying it. So opening up a dusty box or looking at, asking to pull down something from the top back corner of the warehouse and see what's inside the box. Verifying the freshness of produce, or any kind of aspect of inventory measurement that would go to the count of inventories or even the freshness or obsolescence of the inventory. Also, this is also relevant even for inventory that has RFID tags or scanning device capabilities. So you still have to verify that everything has been tagged and that it's correctly tagging what it's saying that's representing. So the auditor still has to be physically there at the warehouse and verifying this part. And then also they have to observe the general environment of the auditing client. This goes for any type of business, whether it's a financial concern or a bank or insurance company or a manufacturer or a shipping company, retailer. They need to observe the climate, of the general tone of the top and all these types of other more nuanced measurements that go into our assessment of whether we think the client is giving us truthfully representational financial statements. So recall that when we go to an audit engagement, it's there to verify whether the unaudited financial statements are truthfully representing the financial activities or the financial condition of the company at that time. And there, of course, we don't have inside information until we get there to the audit client, or we're given access to their databases. And we have to generate a risk assessment of whether, first of all, the client can stay in business. So there's a going concern estimate that we have to make. And then also whether there's a chance that we may not catch or detect that there is a misstatement in the financial statements that's material. In other words, it could impact an investor's decision to invest in this company. So there's two very big risks that the auditor faces, that the auditor has to deal with. And part of how we deal with this is to collect this evidence. And the other important evidence collecting method that's physical is assessment of assets. So a client may say this building is worth $3 million. Well, you still have to examine the building. Now, you may have an expert help you with this, but you still have to look at whether this is truly an accurate financial evaluation of that asset. So the auditor is really required still by the standard setters to be there physically. And in this day of COVID-19, with travel restrictions and the lack of safety and physical proximity to one another, this becomes a problem. And the SEC has extended the deadlines for auditors to examine companies and and those firms to file their reports. But the PCAOB, which is the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, and the AICPA have not given a relaxation of the standards and requirements in these areas. So this has been a conundrum for auditors, and the SEC allows companies who are filing their annual reports to extend that time if a third party, such as an auditor, cannot fulfill their obligations. And unfortunately, COVID-19 happened it started emerging as a risk in the end of February and early March, when companies firms are closing their annual engagement processes for calendar year clients, and they're also then also filing the reports with the SEC. So I'm sorry, the companies are. So there's this issue that we have to revise what we earlier said in our reports, our financial statements, and then also for auditors going forward, we may have to revise what we said about the audit client in the opinion.
Yeah, when you mention what auditors do in their role, it involves heavily them physically being someplace and opening up and examining things. And in the world we live in of social distancing right now, and you mentioned this in your response, but if you can talk more about how the collection procedures changed since the start of the pandemic, and how in the world can an auditor, with the physical requirements of observation, inventory observation, how can they possibly practice social distancing by able to do what they need to do from an auditing standpoint?
Thank you for asking me the question. So, I mean, to my knowledge, many of these kind of procedures have come to a halt, simply because really, I mean, under the current standard requirements, there is no way for them to physically be there, and it's not an essential activity. It's not safe for the auditor to be there, and travel is hard to come by. So this has been a real problem for the auditor. So what we propose in our paper, and we suggest, is that the standard setters need to, or they should be, relaxing the standards right now. The PCAOB is undertaking, looking at using technology in the accounting and auditing process. So maybe it's a good time for them to say, okay, well, we're going to relax the standards about inventory accounting and asset evaluations and observations, and allow you to use more innovative technologies during this period to see how it works. And in our paper, we argue that, for example, first-person view, or FPV cameras, and FPV camera-fitted drones might be a very good segue for this, or actually a solution to this, where you would still have to have an employee of the company or one member of the audit staff there in the warehouse. But that individual could either have a camera on his or her forehead that's either Google Glasses or a GoPro camera, or they could be even flying a drone under their visual line of sight. And these cameras would be recording real-time videos that are not only being recorded, but they're also feeding live stream video to the remotely located auditor, and his or her computer, and they can control the process. They can evaluate it. They're observing right then in real time. They can ask somebody to open the box. They can see it themselves. In other words, they are observing it through the camera. And The only caveat is that most firms do require that there be some vetting or testing of the software, the technology, to make sure that it's that's reliable, that there's not a lot of cybersecurity breach capabilities. So there would be more demand on cybersecurity restraints in this particular device. But we see that this is a good solution for this situation where the auditor can still be in his or her home office and observe the inventory counts. It may not be right on time like it would be before, but it's better than not doing anything.
So
And also they would have to be more accustomed to using conferencing tools. Now these have their own drawbacks. For example, it's very difficult to sort of sense somebody in an intuitive way when you're talking with them on a video, although there might be other signals you could pick up. So it's a learned skill, learning how to use, to observe people and to do interviews using conferencing tools like Zoom or GoToMeeting or Skype. Most likely the firms would use a tool like probably GoToMeeting or Zoom because these have more cybersecurity capabilities. The big issue, I think, and that some reason why the firms may be a little reluctant to use these technologies is because there's a very tightly controlled data flow and environment that auditors work in. So, computers are pretty much locked down. You can't, for example, download anything onto the flash drive without special permissions. So there's going to have to be some very strong gateways of security for the video flows between a camera and the auditor's computer. But we see that these live stream video feeds would have a really good potential, a great potential for solving the auditor's problems. And in my opinion, after this is all over and done with, that may be actually considered as a permanent way to record audit evidence, because we have recordings and we have videos that are there as really good audit evidence that the auditor can verify. Yes, I was there. I was part of the collection process. I told this person to go there and look at this box. I was there observing the feed in real time, and I signed off on this video that this is actually inventory evidence. And so I think that ultimately this would be even a better system for auditors to take inventory counts or observe inventory counts than what is currently in place.
So in these methods, are you proposing these methods, or they're being done currently?
Well, to my knowledge, they're not being done currently, only because the standards have not been really clear or made a pronouncement about video evidence. Okay, so this is where it gets a little sticky. Right now it's not considered to be something that is reliable audit evidence, or at least the standards haven't made an opinion on it. So auditors, being that we are risk adverse and we tend to follow, and we're regulatory driven, we tend to be following regulations. No one, to my knowledge, is doing this currently.
And
now, just be aware that clients such as Amazon and Walmart have very sophisticated warehousing setups, where most of the warehouses manned and operated by drones and robots. And my understanding is E&Y does use cameras and drones in their audit or the inventory observations there. But to my knowledge, they have not submitted that yet as an audit engagement evidence yet. It's still under the sandbox type of environment.
Because let's say worst case scenario, let's say 3 months, we're still in this mode of social distancing. Eventually, these methods will have to be accepted, because you're not going to be able to halt auditing for a certain amount of time period. It's not like you say, well, 6 months, no one's going to get audited.
They would love that, right?
Exactly. So I guess how long would it take for these methods to be accepted and allowed?
Well, okay, so you're asking, this is an interesting question. If you go through the standard process of where we have regulatory changes or amendments, it could be up to 7 years.
Wow.
Because usually there's a vetting process. They put out a feeler, looking for input and, from different various bodies that are interested in this issue. Then they go through a council that reviews this feedback. They generate another type of proposal. Then that goes to another round of feedback. And then it goes through different cycles of evaluation. And so it could be up to 7 years. So lease accounting, for example, has been in that limbo. Just now recently it's starting to be in place, but actually they've pulled it back now a little bit because of the COVID-19. So I think they would have to make an emergency type of declaration, or the SEC would even have to say, well, look, we can't hold up these audit opinions and financial statement filings indefinitely until the COVID-19 is over, and we go back to less social distancing. I think the SEC is going to have to make an emergency announcement that would supersede anything that's in place right now, and say, okay, we would accept video evidence for inventories. We would accept, first person view camera video feeds in lieu of physical evaluation of inventory observations. But I haven't seen that yet. The most of the SEC has done to date is extended the filing deadline for companies that got impacted by this, either because they filed at the end of the calendar year, and if this emerged during the 60-day period when the auditors are conducting the engagement after the 12/31 deadline, or maybe it's impacting them because they finish, in the second quarter. So this has been a big challenge, trying to find out, it goes like anything else with COVID-19. There's so much uncertainty, and unfortunately, it's really impacting the ability for auditors to complete their work.
Yeah, you and I spoke briefly before we began the podcast about how life has changed now, and when life goes back to normal, will these new methods and strategies and things that we're doing as consumers outside of auditing, will they continue on after the pandemic? So, for example, I had a podcast with Dr. Chatterjee. She talked about consumer behavior and how it's changed during the pandemic. And we as consumers, you and I, as we shop for groceries or go to retail stores or even for food pickup, we're now getting used to these new ways of shopping and living our lives. And when it gets to a point where it gets safe, whenever that is, months from now, where we could take off the masks and gloves and shop like we normally have, will we continue and say, well, I never tried online shopping or groceries? Like for me, for example, we grocery shop online, so the food's delivered to our home. And I mentioned to my wife last night, I said, even after this pandemic subsides and where it's safe to go into a grocery store and not have to worry about infecting anyone or ourselves, will we continue on with this? And I will, because I realized this pandemic forced me into trying something, doing my behavior changed because it was the pandemic, and we'll continue on. So That's why I think it's fascinating in your area. Once the pandemic does subside and it's safe for auditors to go into the offices and the warehouses, will these new technologies that you're proposing, will the SEC say, well, you know what, we'll allow this and as an alternative because it saves time, energy, money. I mean, I know there's limitations and probably different implications with doing those, but even something as simple as a remote learning. I mean, you know that because you're a professor at Montclair. Doing remote learning has changed how students are interacting on an educational level, even on a business level. Everyone is using Zoom. So it'll be, once this is over, and over is a relative term, whatever that means, see how the world changes. But in your field, once that pandemic's over, what do you think it's going to look like from an auditing standpoint if you had a crystal ball?
Well, I will try to pull out my crystal ball and see if I can. I mean, hopefully, what I'm hoping is that there are certain practices that may change or evolve using more technology tools, like the first-person view cameras and using video feeds from these kind of cameras and drones, and using other kinds of conferencing tools, because they are turning out to be a better substitution or a better practice for auditors to be more efficient and effective auditors. So, I mean, I see that, for example, using the first-person view cameras for inventories probably is a huge cost savings for a firm. So the firms are facing huge competitive pressures all the time, just like any other industry, particularly now after COVID-19, it'll probably be even worse. I would think they would want to try to find a way to be more efficient and effective auditors while saving fees and expenses, and also satisfy the regulatory requirements. So unfortunately, I would have to say that I think that any kind of wholesale change is going to have to require some regulatory guidance. Now, the regulators will say that there's nothing in their regulations that sort of prohibits use of technology, but doesn't encourage it. And auditors are always afraid to be the first one out there. But I'm hoping that because hopefully the regulators will allow some relaxation of the standards during this period. And with that, like you said, the SEC hopefully will relax their standards and allow these types of evidence collection procedures to occur, then I would say yes, that there is going to be some additional technology inlays into our field, which is, it's only time for this because business is largely on a technology platform as it is. Almost every business is on using technology in a very advanced way. And auditors have to do the same, I think. We need to be, leading the pack, so to speak, with the way we collect audit evidence and have our clients be fearful of what we're doing as opposed to, trying to understand why we're still showing up at a physical inventory with a clipboard in hand when they're using cameras and drones and RFID tags. So I'm hoping that this will sort of force the issue that, Miklos, one of my co-authors in this paper, he was also my advisor when I was a PhD at Rutgers. He was a pioneer in this industry many years ago. We was at AT&T Bell Labs in the late 80s, early 90s. He was saying, why aren't we doing auditing continuously? We collect all this phone data, on a continuous basis. We should be monitoring this data and also auditing it on a real-time basis. And, the profession has yet to do this. Yes, we're monitoring, and clients are monitoring this in a real-time basis, particularly the credit card and financial transactions, but we're not auditing on a real-time basis. And we're hoping that maybe this particular situation, we're trying to make lemonade out of lemons, right? So we have these lemons, a situation here, and we're trying to make lemonade out of it, which is, this is going to allow us to be a more continuous audit, a more virtual and technologically sophisticated audit, and hopefully the regulators will allow this to occur.
As a layperson, as you're talking about these different methods of the first person camera and the drone, just sounds to me, it's like, that's a great idea, but I guess what are the negative, why would that be looked at negatively? Why wouldn't the SEC allow that? I guess, what are some of the issues in them saying, well, we're going to accept that procedure? Because anything in life, there's always a positive and a negative. What are the negatives?
Okay, the negative would be, so if you're using it for inventory observation, so there is still this feeling in the profession that, you're there, you're physically feeling something, and you're physically looking at it yourself. Nothing is better than that, right? So there's nothing that can substitute for that. And I think the challenge will be to show that, okay, these video feeds are a viable alternative to that presence, that physical presence that you would have had normally. The other challenge would be that, there is a cybersecurity issue, like I mentioned. So we're relying a lot on network connectivities and, lack of breaching of internet transmissions. And so there's going to have to be a very secure VPN transmission between the camera and the auditor's desktop. There could be, that has to be seamless. And also, I would say that the software and the cameras have to be vetted. So there's always horror stories about, for example, DJI and their drones, that their hardware has been, tracking activities that go to the Chinese headquarters. So there's been some reluctance on auditors' part lately to take on some of these technologies, but then again, DJI now has apparently turned this off. So I think that depending on which technology we're talking about, and the audit firms can vet it. So that might also be another reason why this is sort of taking slow to take on adherence in the audit profession, is that we have to vet these tools. The auditors can't just start using, for example, Zoom just without checking it out. So all the press recently about Zoom security problems, it could be very well true that the firms may not want to use Zoom for their conferencing tools because of this. So these are some of the challenges that, first of all, like I said, just trying to feel comfortable with the fact that you're not really there physically in your own presence in these situations. And then secondly, the security problem, trying to vet these tools and the way the audit firms need to do this. So that, for example, most firms don't use open source software because, it's hard to lock it down and have it be private. Yeah. So they usually will develop their own version of some other tool that's out there in the marketplace.
And when you mentioned vetting these new methods, what I thought of is when you have how the pharmaceutical industry, when they come up with a vaccine or a type of drug, there's a testing period, there's clinical trials and human trials. And how does that process work? You mentioned vetting them.
Well, okay, so this is There's an area that Sean Budnick, who was also another co-author on this paper, she was a audit innovation partner at Deloitte and also KPMG, and she's brought this up, and and I'll learn a lot more from her. But basically, like I mentioned before, the firms cannot reliably just adopt using a technology without testing it. And like you mentioned, yes, there would be a sandbox. There would be, a period of seeing how the information flows work, and testing the environment to see whether there's any holes in it. There's a lot of work that would be done for forensic analysis. So, for example, in video feeds, there's a whole big area field of forensic analysis of video feeds. So you can tell whether a video has been spliced or whether the pixels have been altered or something's been changed with the video. So you have to be able to do all this kind of forensic analysis of the video feed and of the tool to make sure that it's working the way it's supposed to be working. But I look at that kind of analysis and I say, okay, well, you have an auditor who's a person. Yes, we have professional training, and we're supposed to be neutral and and professionally competent, but we're still human beings. So we're there at an inventory observation, and how likely you see everything that you're supposed to see, being that you have eyes and you're tired, or you've been watching things for 7 or 8 hours and there's no relief in sight. Are you catching everything you're supposed to catch? So I don't know. I mean, I think you have to look at apples and oranges, say, okay, well, are they the same things? Maybe the video feed is better than the auditor in some cases and not in others. So the firm would have to do an evaluation and see whether the video or the other type of tool provides it's technically reliable for them, and that they can maintain security about it.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting because we can do this another podcast in a few months from now because in a few months things are going to be a lot different, because I'd be interested to see how the industry has changed and is adopting these technologies, or if they just go back to the way they were. It's like anything in life. Sometimes you get forced into doing something and then you don't have to do it anymore. You just revert back to what you've done before. So,
right.
And that's why I always enjoy speaking with you, because I really know nothing about your area of expertise. I learn a lot. So I'm always fascinated when we have our.
Well, thank you. By the way, it was interesting. Like normally my classes, they were always physical for the most part at Montclair. Occasionally, sometimes we would have classes online. Now it's all online. And typically the students they're always very reluctant. I require all of my classes, they have to give a physical presentation at the end of the semester. And, I demand that they don't look at their computer screens, and I want them to engage with the audience and look at their audience, and don't be afraid to refer to the slides when they need to, speak out. And, everyone's required to speak at some point. The more socially inhibited ones will speak more than the ones that are less extroverted. But they always dread it for the most part. And now, like last night, we were doing our presentations online on Zoom. And I was really surprised. Most of the students did very, very well. They were more comfortable. And they said, we wish we were doing this for all our classes, or you should really adopt this method of presenting online as opposed to doing it physically. So I'm thinking that in the future, even if my classes are physical at Montclair, that the presentations may be online in a Zoom format, because the students seem to be doing better with it. They seem to be more comfortable, and they seem more comfortable with the idea of presenting online as opposed to being in person. And we may be going that way as a society, I think, that due to COVID-19 in some ways. But some of my other colleagues may not agree with this and may go back to being physically there in class and having physical presentations.
Yeah, I also teach a class. I'm an adjunct at the school, and I'm doing my class synchronous online on Tuesday nights. And it's been I've enjoyed a lot of it, and having that conversation and interacting with the students. I miss seeing them physically. That engagement you have with them. But what I find is, and you pointed this out, students that are very quiet in the classroom when we were there physically are more talkative when we're online. And
exactly.
Comfortable in expressing their opinions and asking questions. So, and again, higher education is another area where we're going to see how the pandemic has affected how we deliver our courses across all universities in the world, because everyone has pretty much gone to remote learning. And faculty now have, I know in the case of where we work, within 7-8 days, turned their classes fully online. So the faculty members that may have been a little bit more reticent and and concerned about going online. Now they've done it and they have some confidence in doing it and say, you know what, this online course may work for me, and I may try because I did it and I was forced into doing it because of the pandemic, and we might see a higher adoption rate. But again, it's just another area of that's going to change based on what's all happening. So, but
Exactly.
Deniz, I appreciate the talk, and as always, I always learn from you, and I enjoyed the conversation. I'll have you back in a couple months because I
Thank you, Phil.
how this progresses along and see how things change. For everyone listening, again, please check out other episodes that we have on our podcast channel, and enjoy the conversations we have with faculty when they bring their expertise to a topic, and especially now more than anything, what's going on in the world we live in today, the uncertainty of the world. There's nothing better than hearing from a professor who's done research in this area and who could really give a thoughtful, unbiased opinion on where we're going in their specific areas. So, with that, thank you all for listening, and we look forward to more of these podcasts.
Thank you, Phil, very much for inviting me here today.